the last thing I do is I try and pull it up to make sure the sound is actually coming through.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm sorry for the process.
No, not at all.
In case you can't tell, I'm extremely self-conscious about this.
Don't worry, I completely understand.
Just make sure that we've got audio. Sometimes if Wi-Fi is not great.
Especially here.
Yeah, sometimes. So I heard myself whistling. We should be good.
Okay,
And I
perfect.
can always clean it up later. So
Okay.
with that, okay. So just as a place to start, tell me a little bit about who you are, where you're at, what you teach, and kind of what your interest or what you've heard about learning communities so far. And that'll kind
Okay,
of guide me on where I can most help you, I guess, or most
sure.
support your growth in this area or
Okay.
understanding.
Yeah. So my name is Malda Sarayji, and I am an OIO in economics here. And I guess that's it. About learning communities, I actually took a formal training in learning communities. I used to work for Pima Community College,
Okay.
and so I took a formal training about it. But that was like about 3 years ago.
Okay.
um, have not implemented it ever. So, but I am very interested in it because I think the performance of the students will be better with
Hmm.
learning communities. And also, it's always very interesting to merge different disciplines. I mean, not merge them completely, but at least have some partial commonality.
Some connection across this,
Yes,
kind of
absolutely.
merging, like crossing the streams a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, so with the work or the training from Pima, what were some of the things that you do remember from that? Like, what were kind of their main things they focused on?
So they mentioned, again, that was 3 years ago. So they mentioned that the students had to take a cohort of three classes
Mm, okay.
together, which was like bigger than the usual. I heard here learning communities are two classes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, over there it was three, and that some assignments had to be common to all three classes.
Mm-hmm.
And within the each class, for example, so when I'm talking about economics, I need to try to incorporate, let's say I'm doing, how AI is going to change the structure of the economy. So if I'm doing a learning community with AI, for example, so I need to focus on that throughout my teaching. All of the topics, the examples need to be from the other two courses. And sometimes I would have to go and teach in one of the other courses, and some my colleagues would have to do the same.
Okay.
So that's what I remember.
Yeah, yeah. And
So
each of those elements can kind of show up, and sometimes it's a little bit here, a little bit there, and then sometimes it's like fully integrated and like every
yes,
week. So
okay,
okay, good. So yeah, so those kind of core understandings are there. Well, so here we've over the last decade or two primarily focused on fully integrated, fully co-taught learning communities. And so that's been so as like the main thing we tend to sometimes that gets privileged or prioritized. And that's because it is kind of the best practices model. And so that means that you have from the beginning, usually about a year out for that type of setup, you have teachers who have agreed, they decide on specific courses, and they work over 6 months or a year to align everything from their grade book, their daily plans, their assignments, and then even sometimes even changing a from a stacked model where it's like all this class and then all that class
yeah,
to having a fully co-taught interwoven set of
nice,
classes throughout the
wow,
semester. So
yeah,
that's like the most intense extreme version of learning communities. It's the mashup course where both courses have their core content but inflect toward the other or contextualize toward the other. And so, for me, if I'm teaching my writing and I'm pairing with chemistry, then it would be like I'm teaching all my writing content and then I'm seeing where in chemistry do these things apply and using chemistry as the lens or the examples, to talk about these things. And chemistry is talking through chemistry, and then we will pull back over and use writing as some of the examples, or the way scientists connect or talk and that kind of thing. Kind of using each course as a reflection back on the other, and that way it's taking. That idea of like a far transfer scenario. How does chemistry do chemists even write, or that kind of thing,
Yeah.
or mathematicians or whatever, and then saying and helping students kind of draw those things closer and practice kind of that active transfer. And so yeah, so there are two things that you already know, and I'll just frame them this way to make it easier, or just to kind of anchor it. So one part is that cohort, right? So you usually, for learning communities, you usually have students in multiple classes, like sharing a schedule of some kind. And whether that's a three sequence, like full block schedule, or whether it's giving them two classes that they're both co-enrolled, that all students are co-enrolled in, or something like that, that social aspect, and is that cohort build is a core part of learning communities. And so in some institutions and in some cases, that's the only thing that makes the learning community a learning community, is that they're co-enrolled.
Right.
Sometimes the teachers don't know about each other, or don't know, like, and that's but that would be one extreme, like where it's only socially oriented. It gives them and even that has positives, like a sense of belonging,
Right.
and a support structure beyond, so students have more of a reason to stay and bond and connect and build relationships on campus. So that's an extreme on one end that's still good,
Right.
but not the full picture of learning communities. And then the other side you said was like, and we've been talking about, is that kind of uh, that weaving together of content, and that transfer side. So that would be like the academic benefits of the students gain. And so we've got kind of these kind of two core values, two core emphases that, and benefits that students get: the social belonging, and connectedness, as well as like learning to transfer, learning to interconnect content, getting them to think about how, in a more deep, in a deeper way, how content and it kind of applies beyond its basic context. So when we're building learning communities, that's one of the reasons why that fully integrated model is the best, like seen as the best practice. Now, here we've started also shifting over the last few years to help people see the possible on ramp,
Right.
so that it's not just the full extreme.
Right.
And so, and I realized that I've got a PowerPoint up, but I can't show you that. And so, but the short version is you've got this on ramp of steps, and any one of them may emphasize either of the values or both of the values. So we start, if it's either an on ramp, or it's what the Marines call a retrograde, which is a strategic retreat from.
Oh.
Sorry, I just was thinking about it last night. But like, so it's this idea of like, here's the optimally positioning, and then if you have to strategically retreat beyond backwards into a simpler form or a more defensible form. It's a weird way of thinking it, but my brain does that. So you kind of have these steps. So first, like, you could begin the process, since that best practice takes time to plan,
Yes.
and sometimes and energy and effort, and sometimes, and people usually want to get paid if they're going to engage in it that much, and we're working on making sure that's a clear, there's a clear trajectory for doing that kind of work. If you just want to kind of dip your toe in and you don't have a lot of time, it's like you can start with just a common intellectual experience, which could be, you get with a couple other professors, and you're thinking about the academic interweaving, right?
Okay.
Contextualizing. So that means you don't have to have co-enrolled students, which is a whole layer of administration, right, to get students
Right.
enrolled.
Exactly.
Instead, you start with, who are professors I like, who are professors who have similar schedules to me, who teaches at the same time that I do, and is there ever a day where we would be talking about the same thing but from different angles? And then you can basically get your classes to show up in, you can have your classes show up to the same, same room
room.
and both
Yeah.
of you practice co-teaching,
Right.
or do a professor swap. Maybe it's not that you're teaching the same thing, but maybe something about their content is relevant to
Right.
yours, but you're not the expert.
Yeah.
So you usually kind of work your way through it, but it's not, you don't think it'll be as good as having someone who
Right.
studies it, right?
Right.
And vice versa. So you find a partner that you can swap skills with, and so you do a
Right.
if you're scheduled at the same time, you basically have a professor swap,
Right.
where you teach lecture their class or teach their
Okay.
class, and they teach your class just for a
Okay.
day.
Okay.
Um, so that would be like that common intellectual experience. Sometimes it is a shared read, sometimes it's a professor swap, sometimes it's a we're going to get both our classes together and do like a an interview back and forth of each other about
Right.
this, and kind of what does your
That would
field
be
say
nice.
about it? What does
Yeah.
your field say about it? So for instance, like in English 102, research is a core component. And if I were trying to lean into just do that first step in the on ramp, just barely get my feet wet with chemistry. Chemistry has a lot they deal with from a scientific perspective. Research is a big deal,
Okay.
but it might be it's done a certain way in chemistry. So it could be something like I present research generally, and the chemistry person presents it to their specific natural sciences framework,
Right.
or what does a lab report look like?
Right.
And so then my students who are in a writing class would benefit by hearing what writing looks like in that discipline,
Of course.
without me having to teach a lab report,
Yes.
right?
Of course.
And then his students would get kind of, maybe he's used to teaching this is a very specific type of writing, and then they'd get connection to the bigger picture of like
Right.
what are common practices that are good for writers no matter what, as far as research goes. And so they get to kind of pull out from the focused type of research that they're doing here to the big picture, like how do writers deal with knowledge and that kind of thing. So that could be like we could do something like that.
Okay.
And so so that's the first step on ramp. If anyone's ever trying to start learning communities,
Right.
that is the easiest foot in,
Right.
because you don't have to worry about having students co-enroll. You don't have to worry about long-term planning. You
Right.
could find someone who has a shared schedule with you next week and be
Right.
like, let's do this. You got it? Like, we don't you should plan. You
Of
should plan a
course.
little
Yeah.
bit. But
Exactly.
but it could also be fun to just be like, okay, we're both kind of talking about this.
Right.
You come with your best version of this, and I'll come
Yeah.
with my best version, and then we will. It part of the fun for students sometimes is watching people negotiate the
Exactly.
conversation,
Exactly.
and sometimes the minefields of disciplines,
Yeah.
live. And so it keeps it engaging and entertaining, and they get to see, well, there are two perspectives on this, and my teacher has a meaningful one, and their teacher has a meaningful one. And so yeah.
Exactly.
So that's step one. That's like on ramp piece one. So what does that make you? What's the kind of any questions you have about that?
So that's actually very interesting. My dream is actually to eventually do a learning community with AI.
Okay, and what do you mean by that?
So basically to be fully like to have like the full engagement as in like co-taught classes.
Mm-hmm.
With
Like engineering, artificial intelligence
artificial
classes,
intelligence in particular.
or you mean like having a chat GPT bot teaching with you?
Well, that's another dream of mine.
I was just like
So it's like
AI
to do-
faculty.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to
So
make sure I
basically,
understood.
I'm talking about AI faculty. So as
Okay.
a first step, basically, is having AI faculty and having a learning community with maybe um, AI 101, I think, or 102 it's called.
Mm-hmm.
The first AI course, which is, what is AI for? What does it do? So basically, it's a very basic class about AI. But I noticed that a lot of my students don't know how to use AI.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have two extremes. And some of them use it for everything, and some of them don't use it at all.
Right.
Don't know what it can do. So what I think, because AI has a lot of influence on economics in general, on the economy. So not only do they need to know how to learn to use it,
Mm-hmm.
but they need to know its effect on the actual economy. So if we have a learning community of those two courses, it will help show them, oh, this is changing the entire structure of the economy. And this is what we call structural unemployment. So I talk about structural unemployment. This is how I can use it for my assignments because I allow my students to use anything and they want for my courses. I want them to learn prompt engineering.
Okay.
I want them to learn economics in a new way where we have GPT assistants, for example, that do all the statistical work for us today. We used to have to learn all of this, in econometrics and everything and statistics, and now you just, get this GPT assistant, dump all the data and get the report in like a split second.
And that leans into outcomes you have in your classes that have to do with not generating data, but or processing data, but coming to conclusions about those patterns. Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So basically, and even with recommendations, which is like what we economists do, like we analyze data and give recommendations, AI gives better recommendations than humans.
Okay.
So if we don't teach our students how to use it, if they don't want to become economists, at least they know the potential. If they choose to become economists, this is what they're going to need to learn. They no longer need to learn supply and demand and the curves. They have to know what it is about, but this is the basic for what they're going to do next, which is like using, chatbots for everything.
Yeah. And part of understanding how to use it is how to know, like knowing enough about the thing so that you're not just assuming it's right all the time, or assuming that if you ask a question that it's understanding the question you're asking, right?
Yeah.
So
that's
part of it too.
That's a key component, because also it's one of the major skills required in the job market. So for me, when I teach my courses, I don't only teach economics, because even if I want to just teach economics, chatbots can do it way better than I can.
Yeah.
If it's just the transfer of information.
Right.
But I want to give them the soft skills that they can use in the job market. And one of the prominent job skills soft skill that is required today is prompt engineering. So that's why I allow them to use it for everything.
Gotcha.
So they need to learn how to use it. So I think a learning community with artificial intelligence would be very impactful for economics, because the field is changing so quickly that even us economists can't catch up. Like I am very interested in AI. I read about it every day and how it impacts the field.
It's kind of getting turned up.
Like, oh my God, I can't keep
bachelor's.
up. I can't keep up. I honestly can't.
Well, what could be interesting, like even thinking like more broad than just like faculty who are specifically in the AI field, thinking about how, like, if you did a professor swap or a mashup day where you like a shared teaching day, where if you wanted to talk about prompt engineering and the benefits in economics, like if you had a writing or communication professor talking about audience and how the technology acts as an audience, like that it's got some sort of agency, you can kind of depending on what you give it, you get a different response. And so how do you frame things so that you get the response you're really looking for? So that could be even thinking beyond just a pairing, like a full course pairing, exploring the ideas could be meaningful too, with some of the more gen ed communication or writing classes. Okay, so then even just thinking, so that's how like starting a professor swap or starting in the on-ramp could work. And so you could, if you don't have a year to plan because you're in a part-time or an OYO position, that can be a really great way to start churning things up and being like, hey, do you teach this? Because I'm trying to figure out, I want to be able to give more than just what I have on this. And so that can be, then it's just a little bit of scheduling and finding a space that fits both classes, or deciding what day of the week or what day in the semester you guys can swap to give each other's content. And that could be something like you just do a quick email, or you have one of those coffee, or water cooler chats as you're walking by kind of thing.
That's good.
So then so the next step up on the on-ramp, so we've got those kind of common intellectual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We have ways that where you can try and develop socially linked cohorts where the teachers aren't as involved, but I'll kind of jump over that for now because it's less pertinent to what we're talking about. There's also, if you do have a little bit of planning and you can get a semester or two out, one way to kind of get your feet wet with LCs is not to do a full class co-enrollment, but to do what we're kind of talking about as pocket LCs. Are you familiar with how we do honors courses?
No, not
Okay.
here.
So it's basically so scheduling basically has a separate section for honors
No.
students that
Yeah.
is 5 or 10 students
Right.
out of 25. And
Yes.
so together those enrollments equal, the total cap for the course, but you've got 20 regular and 5 honors separated seats. So if we did something like that, instead of it being honors, we did a pocket LC where it's like 5 to 10 students. Like those seats are reserved for those students, and 15 or 20 or whatever is kind of the standard anybody can show up.
Right.
That kind of pocket LC model might be a way to test out an LC, and specifically an LC you're not sure could enroll 25 students or 30
Okay.
students or whatever your normal
Right.
cap is.
Right.
Because that's one of the reasons why leaning into a fully integrated model, like programs have struggled in Maricopa and here too, is that we'll get courses that were like the teachers will spend time investing in building the curriculum to fully integrate, and then they get 5 students, and then they have to break that up, and then it's like, well, I can't. They feel like they can't run the curriculum they designed because not everybody's in both sides,
Yes.
and so. But if you've already developed it, you could develop it for a group of 5 or 8, and they still get the academic and social benefits of the learning community, and the other students just get what they would get anyways.
Okay.
And so part of us trying to figure out the best way to fund faculty for developing this kind of work is trying to get them to be rewarded for the work they do ahead of time, no matter whether they get fully integrated or not. So the Pocket LC version is like a partial learning community where only some of your students are enrolled.
So when you say honor students, are they enrolled in the same class? Like would it be also economics, or would it be like chemistry and economics, for example?
So in that case,
when you say LCs, because
so the honors, the way we do honors, it wouldn't have to be honors students in the LC, just to be
okay.
clear, make a distinction.
Okay.
But the structure we use for honors, we could switch and say instead of honors
Oh,
students,
okay.
LC students.
Oh, okay.
That
Okay.
makes sense.
So it doesn't have to be honor students.
Correct.
It has to be LC students, however, in 2 different courses. So
Yeah.
definitely
So
not
say
the same course.
say you're doing economics, and we can go look at the data and say what's a common co-enrollment, like when are students taking economics fall spring, and when do we have the large
class at Williams, and we don't get a lot of students because most students at Williams, they they take other gen ed classes, or they are already enrolled in a specialty program that does
Mhm.
not require gen ed classes.
Gotcha.
So but we offer it anyways because some students, they want to finish, they want to graduate, and
Mhm.
they still need this gen ed classes. So this is how this class unfortunately has been taught. So what I was thinking is, if we can find a course that we can pair it with, this would actually increase enrollment for both my course. This would actually increase enrollment for both my course and whoever is teaching over there. So
Gotcha.
it can be nursing, it can be AI, it can be anything, and because economics applies to everything, so
Mhm.
really, literally, you can pair it with any other course.
Yeah, and so then so how do I want to do this next step? I want to dig into some data with you,
Okay.
because I think that'd be useful. I'm trying to decide how hard is it for me to co-opt your monitors?
No.
Like, is it just a quick unplug?
Yeah,
We could
exactly.
try that, and
Yeah.
hopefully it won't break things. So let's try that real fast
Yeah.
and see how it goes.
The only problem is I have virtual office hours. Let me log in on my phone.
Okay. Or it'll just pull over that to your laptop. Like you could have that window open there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that might
that's
be.
true, that's true.
So it's still going to
That's
be
true,
there.
yeah,
It's just going to be
exactly. So let me
sucked over.
do that,
Okay.
The minute I unplug it, let me just search.
And then how stretchy is the? And then the next question is, will your cable reach
Let me
to here? Let me see if I've got, will it reach to this? How close can we get it? No. You know what?
Let's put this here.
Run over things back there. Sorry, that's my fault for not making it up as we go. It's part of the fun.
So let's try now. So
no, I'll get that. Try right there. See if that's enough. And then it's here. So
there we go. Yeah, that should work.
Okay. So that should be good. And then, so let's theoretically it'll ping, but I'm not seeing it. Did we?
No. Actually, it's
Let's try the one next to it, just in case, because it's taking it as a charger, but not as. Oh, your keyboard. It wanted to use your keyboard, but it's not. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, maybe it just needed a minute. Okay, so continue. We're gonna close that up. Okay, so let's see if it will let me slide some things over. Okay,
Yeah,
so first, so this was the on-ramp I was telling you about first.
Okay.
And so this is one of those things. It's not super big right now, but let's just do that real quick. That didn't help. So we have that common intellectual experience, then just cohort, then we have the pocket LCs. Before we get to fully integrated, we have one other step that we call linked learning communities or linked cohorts. And so that's, it's like the pocket, but you're not in the class all the time. And you align grades, you align assignments, and you have a shared cohort, but the teachers don't have to be in each other's classes. So that's a linked but not integrated.
Okay.
You can decide whether you want to line up grades or line up assignments, and whether how distinct you keep the grades. So there's layers of engagement there. So then the next thing is, where's my other window? So we have some data windows we use. And let me just make sure I'm not just completely out of frame here. Let me turn this just a little bit. Don't let me break things. Okay, so as we're looking at this, we can look at Tableau and say, where is it? So first we would use our top paired courses. And so that basically, if we put in like, what's the econ class you teach?
211 and 212.
ECN?
Yes, ECN. 211.
So if we're looking at ECN 211, and we go over here, we can actually make a distinction by modality if we want to be in person, online, or.
Do you have hybrid by any chance?
So we could say, what are the.
So you don't have hybrid yet.
We did at one point. I'm trying to make sure. I'll have to go and make sure I've got.
Because most of my classes are hybrid and some of them are online.
Yeah, they had updated the tool, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm in the wrong window. So we'll look at that. I'll go see and make sure I can get the right tool.
Just put without modality. If we put 211
so just
in general,
all of them. And if we look generally, and we're looking at if we're looking at spring enrollment, so this is online, hybrid, in person, all of it.
Everything.
So we can say, okay, Econ 211, we've got over 230. We've got about 230 students who also take Accounting 111.
Yeah.
We also have another 225 students who take English 102. Okay. And so now we could compare, like we can get a sense if I say, okay, all online. If we're looking at only the enrollment that's online, then we can do a subtraction basically. Okay. So we've got half of those students of our 230, 240 are online only. Right. So then we can infer that we've got half in person. Yeah. Now, if we're only aiming at 25 to 30 enrollment, having over 100 students, in the
Yeah.
spring who do that, like that's a good possibility.
Possibility,
So that's a
absolutely.
possibility. So that we would do this. This is the data-driven version.
Right.
And so that's so you were bringing up like I really would like to pair with AI. And so if we looked at the numbers or we
Right.
don't have numbers because it's new
Right.
courses,
Yeah.
well then we'd have to go kind of if you build it, they will come and like have hope and faith.
Right. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and so this allows us to like anchor our hope or faith and say yes, but we think we should have 100
Right.
and we can look back a couple semesters and say, okay, yeah, this pattern. And what's good about that is we actually see a couple pairings. So with Econ 211, we see pairings that carry through fall and spring. So if you started developing a pairing of Econ 211 and Accounting 111, like that's something that could work both in the fall and the spring, and you could do the same sets of LCs both semesters. There's enough enrollment for it.
Right.
So that's always nice. The alternative is you do Econ 211 and CIS 105 or Accounting 111, and then you go in the spring and let's check your other one and see what Econ 212 has. So that has less co-enrollments. 212, what is that? GBS 205.
It's GBS.
That's a intro to, or not intro to business, but it's a business course.
It's a business.
But it's one that 80 students take online and not in person. All students, if we look at all students, 124. So we've got like 40 students in person or hybrid, and then 80 students online who take that in the spring. And then we go down and we see about similar numbers for Econ 212 or Accounting 212 and Econ 212.
Yeah.
So these end up being fall combinations. And then, so yeah, you could look at it as like spring to fall.
Right.
So you could make it a spring pairing into a fall pairing and possibly carry the same students through both LCs.
Right. So, yeah. See, because all business students have to take both micro and macro.
Yes.
However, how should I say this? Having a learning community between two disciplines within the field of business, for me as a student, it's not very interesting. Like, I don't know. We should ask the students. Maybe they do take those classes, together. But would it be interesting for them? The only benefit I see for them is that they're gonna have the social part, and we're gonna co-teach or swap classes. But our classes they're not very similar, but we talk a lot about similar topics.
Well, so there's logic to both, right?
Right.
Honestly, like most LCs try and find pairings more like this because it's more comfortable.
Okay. Yeah.
That being said, I do weird things that most, like, there's a reason, like I mash up writing with math and it throws faculty and students off. I mash up math or chemistry and writing and business. And so there's an argument for both. In this course, you've got a lot more like obvious synergy, and which means that you have efficiency.
Yes.
So that means that if you're teaching, it means that the two teachers, they can find efficiency moments in those pairings that might be harder to do with like an English chemistry, English math.
Absolutely.
And so that's a benefit to students. If they're already kind of second, third semester into their major, they've kind of committed. And so then that is really, it's developing the cohort and helping make their learning experience cohesive and efficient. And that's one of the benefits when they're closely related courses or more obviously discipline specific. So that's a benefit there. And the other benefit, the alternate benefit, is if they are distant, and you could do that. Like we saw pairings with good numbers, not with 212, but with with the other one. Though if you look down here, like the fall does have like a MAT 151, and that's got some good numbers in CIS 105, but the 211 had better numbers with CIS 105. And so if you wanted, you could do both, and you could have this 211 with CIS 105. And so that's doing data-driven work. We can say, well, we could have in the fall, we could have their intro to computer class with the 211 class, and in the spring we could do 212 in accounting. And so then you've got the first one where they're stretching, and then the second one where they're kind of being more synergistic. So it's kind of it's neither or bad, and so it ends up becoming what can you find teaching partners for either or both?
Right, that's true.
And so, but that's what, if we're doing it data driven, we can look at those numbers and say, okay, there's data that
Right.
supports, and this course has a lot of flexibility, which is actually really neat because you
Yes.
could pair with anything that's kind of over 100,
Yes.
you might be able to play with. And I should have a dashboard that lets us distinguish. I just am not, apparently that's just not the right one right now.
Okay.
So what I can do, no matter what, is I can go and get you specific data for these courses and send them to you with that in mind.
Okay.
And you can always build an LC with multiple modalities. You could have one that's in person, one hybrid.
Oh,
You
nice.
could have one hybrid and one online.
Okay.
And that's a little more experimental. We have found good success with hybrid, where especially if they're stacked.
Yes.
When they're separate days, my experience has been that it's like if we do English one day and chemistry the other, we've had a little less like it's been less obviously anchored LC wise. But when, like with my math and writing, we've stacked them, it's 3 hours one day a week, we're all together, and it feels more community building.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
but those are so you can do that depending on what the normal modality is.
Right.
Doing all online LCs is an option. It's just different, and that's a whole other conversation.
Okay.
And we haven't done a lot or many of those. COVID kind of forced a few, but it would take some thinking. But yeah.
So for economics, I noticed that enrollment for online courses is a lot higher than enrollment for in-person or hybrid courses. So for the two courses that we offer, we only offer those two courses here at Maricopa Community College in general. So the enrollment, I mean, we're almost capped.
Like you can't offer more of these courses?
No, we can offer more of these courses because there's a high demand. But that's why I'm saying, like, if we do learning communities within online, so online to online, the probability of them being full is higher than the probability of having an in-person or a hybrid learning community.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing, depending on the course pairings, it was either currently you've got 50-50 to in-person hybrid versus online.
Yes.
Or in the 212, I think it was more of a like it was like 2/3 third.
Right.
And so where the third is the in-person or hybrid.
Right.
So yeah, and so if there's leaning into that online space is a possibility. That and just like, and especially if you're planning a year out with a teaching partner, like that's something you could do.
So when you do learning communities online, there's no professor swap, obviously, because there are no lectures.
Yeah.
So how do we do the mashup? How do you actually integrate those two courses?
So that is a really good question, and I think it's worth that might be worth taking a little more time on another day.
Okay. The online portion.
So I say that because it does take a little more work to think through that.
Right.
And so I think that we can always, so maybe we meet another day and talk more online, only because I realized it's 11 o'clock and that's kind of what we scheduled. But I like the idea of doing a second talk on that. It'll also give me time to think about it more. But yeah, so I think it's a meaningful thing, and it's something that, because just to anchor it before ending, because online has drastically shifted and become more prevalent because of COVID, a lot of LC practitioners have not done that. Like there's not as much research in fully online. There's not as much kind of workshopping, how do we do this? And so there's some potential for building a new thing, like a less common thing, and finding out what are the best strategies, what are the best practices. Absolutely. And so trying to merge LC best practices with online learning. I'll just leave it at, there's potential there.
Yeah, so absolutely.
But yeah, okay. Well, hopefully this gives you stuff to think about and plan toward. And I don't have any problem doing more of these. And I like the idea of like a more focused one, like let's brainstorm what online would look like. Exactly. And so
let me just ask you this last question. So what has been your experience on learning communities for courses that are not commonly taken together. So you said you've tried both.
Mhm.
You've tried
So
courses that have been commonly taken together and courses that have not been commonly taken together.
yeah, and that's where looking at the data can help. So
Right.
especially if ultimately the goal is to make sure it feels like a win. Like
Yes.
you don't, we've had people go, we think this pairing would be nice,
Okay.
and then for a couple
Right.
reasons, you know, it took us a few years to get marketing to support it as a to support LCs,
Okay.
but they've been doing amazing work for us, and part of it was we needed to frame it for them differently.
Right.
But we have had LCs that people thought would be good pairings and
Right.
just didn't make. Like we couldn't
Okay.
get people into them,
Okay.
even though they were good courses, and
Right.
we did what we could.
Okay.
And so that side, the if you build it, they'll come is has potential, but we've been trying to lean more toward
To the
data driven,
Okay.
especially with fields of interest and guided pathways.
Okay.
The guided pathways have very strategic sequences,
Yes.
and sometimes students follow those so much so that they don't realize those are recommendations, not requirements.
Yes.
So,
Exactly. Yes.
so in cases where they are further apart, if the data shows that they work, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's then that's a marketing. That's getting
Right.
students who would be like who are finding these 200 students
Right.
or 100 students and finding the 20 or 8 or whatever we say
Okay.
would find this useful.
Right.
And that's easier to do than saying here's 2 courses. We have faculty members who enjoy spending time together, but
Right.
their co-enrollments are like 4.
Yeah. That's
And so that is a very different type of work.
right. Right.
And so that's where using the on-ramp or the retrograde path,
Yeah.
and saying like, which step is best for this type of pairing, for these courses, for these students or whatever.
Right.
That's where kind of you're being discerning a little bit.
Yes.
And that's what I'm here for, and what David Finley, my other co-coordinator, is here for, is like to help
Okay.
find the best match so that the
Right.
teachers who are involved come out with a win.
Yeah.
So,
Of course. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay,
Makes sense.
so I'm gonna go ahead and stop